My name is Marty Levine. I'm going to need some glasses. I'm a career Jewish communal worker. That for all of 50 years of my working life, that's all I have ever done. It's what I did for 40 years, leading the Jewish Community Centers, now the Heckman Family Jewish Community Centers of Chicago. That work was prompted my deep commitment to building a strong, vibrant, and living Jewish community and connecting it to the community I served. In that role, I worked very closely in Chicago with the leadership of the Jewish United Fund, with the leaders of other communal organizations, and with many religious leaders. Those 40 years in the Chicago community, I think, provided me a unique opportunity to understand the inner workings of the Jewish community and to some extent how this law came to the state legislature and how it was passed. I'm appreciative of the opportunity to speak because for me, Israel has always been important, but what Israel is today is also a travesty of its vision and dream, and it is time to address what this law is doing. I know how central Israel is to so many in my community. I learned firsthand that many of my professional colleagues in the work of serving the Jewish community, many of those who lead legacy Jewish organizations, and many of the men and women I pray with weekly have struggled to accept that the Israel of their dreams is not the Israel that we heard about just minutes ago from the representative. They struggle to see Palestinians as a people with a claim to the same land my Jewish community claims as a homeland. They have struggled to accept that Israel was not living up to the noble words of its Declaration of Independence. It was not a land, and I'm quoting from that document, of complete equality of social and political rights. They struggle to see the harm that Israel does every day. For those who claim to speak for the Jewish community that I worked alongside, Israel could do no wrong. Myths became truth of a land without a people, for a people without a land, and anxieties that Israel could be a Jewish state or a democracy, but not both. Those concerns were pushed to the back of our collective consciousness. It was very difficult in that environment to speak words that ran upstream from that common belief. Against this context, the Palestinian people, which included substantial Jewish and Christian populations, stopped being friends and neighbors. Instead, they were reduced to an obstacle, an existential threat to the fantastical dream of a Jewish democratic state. As public consciousness grew, the push became to pass this law that we are now talking about repealing in Illinois. The impetus for this effort was to support Israel's increasingly aggressive efforts to destroy a Palestinian future. This we know from the public 2018 email from Andrew Lappin, who served in the leadership position of the Jewish United Fund of Metropolitan Chicago and was the first chair of the IIPB's Israel Boycott Restrictions Committee. That memo went to Jay Takath, who is a senior JUF executive responsible for public policy agenda. Mr. Lappin said very directly, protecting Israeli sovereignty, particularly as regards Judea and Samaria, was the goal of this effort. And that represents the policy of organizations which have said, we stand with Israel, even in the face of the brutality that is a daily experience. This was not about protecting the Jewish people. This was about protecting an Israeli government and its expansionist desires at the expense of the Palestinian people. From 2005, when the Palestinian civil society representatives first issued their call for a boycott of Israel, a demand that only asked that Israel comply with the international law and with the universal principles of human rights, until 1914, when the effort to combat it reached Illinois, the call for boycotting Israel was becoming louder and louder from those who saw the reality of the Israeli state. BDS, by its very nature, a nonviolent political strategy, was seen by those who saw any protest of Israel policy or action as an existential threat to the status quo. It was seen as so much of a threat that the Israeli government began to spend money to combat it. That amount I read yesterday has grown to almost $750 million in the current Israeli state budget for quote-unquote foreign public relations efforts. And Illinois became ground zero for the legislative maneuvers to construct legal hurdles to effectively outlaw the boycott movement. The potential of a mass movement, a peaceful mass movement, standing up and saying Israel is an oppressor, was a threat to the status quo of Israel. It was a threat because it is nonviolent. It's a threat because it relates Palestine to other oppressed people. It is a threat because it calls for equality. It is a threat because it does not demonize the cause of the Palestinian people. And BDS boycotting was particularly scary to those who saw their purpose as protecting Israel no matter what. Nonviolent protest for the rights of the oppressed had a great resonance in our country. We can remember that in 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up a seat on a segregated bus and launched a 13-month boycott of the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, protesting white racist oppression of her people. That was the beginning of an effort that still goes on, but an effort to make this country live up to its dreams. We can remember that in 1959, an international movement began calling for the boycott of the apartheid regime in South Africa, which, after years of struggle, proved to be successful. Again, an effort to overturn an oppressive regime that resonated deeply for many of us. And let's be clear, since 2014, things have only gotten worse in Israel. Israel has become clearer about its desire to crush the will and the body of the Palestinian people and forever divorce them from their land. The brutality of the occupation has become unavoidable. By 2021, things had gotten so bad that one of Israel's most respected civil rights groups, B'Tselem, published a report telling the world all Palestinians living under Israeli rule are treated as inferior in rights and status to Jews who live in the very same area. This, they said, represented apartheid. That same year, the International Human Rights Organization, which the United States government, until the Trump regime, relied on for definitions of what violated human rights, reached a similar conclusion. In 2024, the International Criminal Court issued indictments of Israel government leaders for war crimes. And just days ago, the world-renowned Israeli Holocaust scholar Omer Bartov, who recognized that Israel was committing war crimes and acts of ethnic cleansing in Gaza, made this statement in an interview in the English language edition of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and I'll quote him. Zionism is an ideology didn't run its course. It became something I don't recognize. It became the ideology of the state. And it became not only militaristic and expansionist, but also racist, extremely violent, and ultimately an ideology that deeply harms both the individual and the collective. Such an ideology has no place. The law that we're asking you to repeal is a law that makes it difficult to protest that behavior by the Israeli government. Earlier this week, Tamar Pardo, who was the former chief of Israel's Mossad intelligence agency, said what he witnessed during a tour of the occupied West Bank reminded him of the treatment of the Jewish people during the Holocaust by the Nazi regime in the 1930s and 40s. The law we're asking you to repeal protects that behavior. Those are scholars. That is a leader of Israel's, former leader of Israel's intelligence agency. Things have not gotten so bad that words that were written in 1967 by the Israeli novelist Amos Oz resonated loudly because it spoke to both Israelis and Jews, and I want to quote him at some length. He wrote right after the 1967 war and the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights by Israel. We were not born to be a people of masters. To be a free people, this wish must awaken and echo in our hearts so long as we have not lost our humanity. We are condemned now to rule people who do not want to be ruled by us. An occupation is inevitably a corrupting occupation, and even a liberal and humane occupation is an occupation I have fears about, the kinds of seeds we will sow in the near future in the hearts of the occupied. Even more, I have fears about the seeds that will be implanted in the hearts of the occupiers. I see no validity in the annexation of populated regions to the bounds of the State of Israel without the agreement of their inhabitants. The residents of Nablus and Gaza are not human material, they're not human dust, they're not subhuman rabble who have to be expropriated so as to create living space. And that leads us to what we're talking about this morning.
I don't want to cut you off or slow you down, but we've only got so much time, so if we could just try to get quickly to the point, yeah.
Keeping the status quo continues to lead Israel down a path of punishing protected speech and nonviolent protest. It is in the same vehicle that President Trump's order this week to punish green card holders for speaking their political views represents. Those telling you that this law should stay in place want to depict BDS as something other than nonviolent. They say or hint that it is anti-Semitic. They say or hint that it will lead to violence. What they don't say is what Andy Lapin said years ago, that the purpose of the law is to support Israeli policy, no more, no less. We all must recognize this and not make it harder for those who see inequity and raise their voices in protest, in peaceful protest. You do not need to agree with them to protect the rights to protest peacefully. It is never too late to correct the mistake. In 2026, Illinois can and must act to erase this dangerous law from the books. Thank you.
Thank you very much.